We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Okay, so let's talk about the actual document itself. What do you make of it?
I thought it was a very well-written document, and it was a really good opinion. You know, when I first read it, I was interested in whether I thought it was authentic or not. Now we know it is, of course, because of the court's announcement that it was. But when it first broke, it was like, geez, is this the real deal? And it had the, I immediately thought that it was. It had the look and the feel of a Supreme Court opinion and the look and the feel of an Alito opinion. I've been reading Supreme Court opinions carefully for too many years to mention, and it just jumped off the page that this seemed legit. So that was sort of the first thing that jumped off the page. And the second thing is that Alito did, I think, what he needed to do for an opinion of this scope with Roe v. Wade, which was knocking down the reasons why that was a good opinion. He really decimated it, I thought, from a legal perspective. Why it didn't deserve.
How so? Please give me a little breakdown.
Let's take the stare decisis issue first. And what he says is
just for us non-legal people, could you just give us a brief rundown?
Stare decisis stands for the principle that something that has been decided should be left alone, basically, because of the reliance interest that people place on it, and other reasons for the kind of smooth running of society, absent some compelling reason. And almost all the justices are asked about this when they're in the appointment hearings. And there's has been an effort by those who support abortion access to call it a super precedent and ask justices about that. And Justice Alito broke that down completely and discussed to give something the value of stare decisis and the super precedent, or really just precedent at all. We have to examine somewhat the basis for the holding in the first place. And that's what he did. And he discussed the fraud upon the court that was committed during Roe and the misunderstanding they had of the facts, namely that for the right to be couched in the due process clause of the 14th Amendment, which is what they did in Roe in large part. They said that in the 14th Amendment, there is a provision that people shall not be denied the due process of law. And the Supreme Court in 1973 interpreted that to include a zone of privacy and that abortion rights were located within that zone. All right. Now, what Alito says is that for that to be true, at the time of the passage of the 14th Amendment, any right that a person says would be included in that zone of privacy would have to be sort of deeply rooted within the American legal tradition, even if it was not articulated specifically. And as somebody who's interested in gun rights, that sort of springs to mind, meaning even though
from the very start, the idea that a person should have the right to own a firearm was inherent in the founding of the country.
Not just should, but did have. And whether or not they had the right that was specified in law, take the Second Amendment away from it, it was normal and regular that people had guns up until, from the founding of the country on through. But it wasn't the case for elective or surgical abortion for obvious reasons. And so I thought that was a powerful argument that he made, knocking down that reason for deference to Roe.
Now, this is what we'd call a bright line ruling, I guess, isn't it?
You know, Mark, there's something extraordinarily special for those of us, I think, who read these opinions for a great bright line rule. I love them. I hate the kind of nebulous, wishy-washy opinions where you get done with it and you think, okay, this is just like a lawyer's full employment act, because they're going to be fighting about it for a generation about what it means. I said that when the Heller case came out, for instance. It was so nebulous about where the line is. And to the direct answer to your question is yes, this is a bright line rule. There's no confusion or debate about what it means. It absolutely just sets Roe aside and says that's not good law, and now we're reverting to the states. And it says explicitly in the opinion in several places that this does not address issues of when life begins and when life does not begin, and what rights a life in gestation may have. just about Roe.
So if this opinion as written now is the one that comes out, do opponents of the decision, do they have any recourse at all?
They could pass a constitutional amendment that enshrines the right to an abortion in our Constitution. That would be the most direct, response that would enshrine the right in the Constitution.
So if Joe Biden and his merry band of Democrats do decide to try and codify a right to an abortion in law, federal right, won't that again be challenged by the very same people who've been challenging Roe v. Wade for all these years?
I've seen these, sort of political statements by those Democrat politicians generally that talk about codifying Roe in the federal law. And I don't understand what they're talking about, Mark, because if Roe is not constitutional, which is what this opinion would say, I don't understand how that legislation helps anything. So yes, that it baffles me why that would be important.
Well, of course, adding 5 or 6 extra justices who do say it's constitutional would make all the difference in the world, Scott.
Well, that is a different kettle of fish altogether. And yes, it would.
Scott DeCosenza, thank you ever so much for joining us.
Cheers, Mark. Thank you.
And that almost wraps it up for this week on Liberty Nation Radio here on the Radio America Network. Before I give you my parting thoughts, I'd just like to give my thanks to today's guests, Lisa K. Donner, James Fight, and Scott DeCosenza. And of course, my thanks to you always, the listeners out there, for taking your time to join us. Here are a few things to think about. When the ruling is finally released, assuming it's at least familiar to the draft leak, abortion in America will not end. Those that tell you it will are, at best, ignorant and at worst, lying to further their own political agenda. When Roe v. Wade is removed, states will revert to the laws they had on the books before the 1973 decision. In fact, the reality is that for most people, life will go on just the same as before, despite the doomsaying prophesized in the legacy media. In fact, in the 50 years since Roe was first passed, no Congress nor president has made a genuine effort to craft a law that codifies abortion into law. All attempts so far have been not able to gain enough bipartisan support, which reflects the feelings of actual Americans. It's a divisive issue that seems in many ways impossible to get a nationwide consensus on. And perhaps that alone is enough of a reason to pass the decision on to individual states. And finally, with this Supreme Court opinion, America isn't being flung back to the Dark Ages. Regardless of which side of the debate you fall on, what it does allow is states, and really the people in those states, to make a determination about what kind of laws they want, and even where they live. It's one of the most beautiful and special things about the United States that you can move freely state to state and still be an American. You can choose to live in a state that reflects your values, that upholds your beliefs. And you can take an important role in shaping those laws by using your right to vote. The court decision gives power and voice to the people, and that's something that should always be celebrated. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
We're doing it for real, really real. Liberty Nation.
And Jeff Charles, contributor for LibertyNation.com.
I think we're starting to make an impact. Liberty style, fight for freedom.
The tracking poll sponsored by Liberty Nation for Thursday.
Mentioned by Dan Bongino, Rasmussen, Jordan Peterson, and
I
others.
can do it again if you want me to.
Cited in Mark Levin's American Marxism.
I think we're starting to make a really big impact. Get noticed. We're doing it. Rock on. I'm gone.